This is Marvelous Videos. I'm Grayson Ottaway, and Aeon Flux, a mature animated series that laid the foundation for many more to follow. In the online electronic media streaming world that we're in today, it isn't uncommon to find animated or cartoon shows that aren't just meant for kids. You can find so many shows with quite enormous fan bases that it's come to a point where they've become conversation starters, and depending on your views on that show, a conversation ender. Jokes aside though, it is really cool that writers are taking to animated mediums to create such shows, especially considering how much more freedom they would have in terms of expression. A lot of these shows actually get you to look inside and to question yourself a lot, like BoJack Horseman or Rick and Morty. However, the adult animation we'll be talking about today is more along the lines of Netflix's Love, Death and Robots. This is one of the most well-received animated shows coming from America in recent times. However, as good as it is, there are also a ton of drawbacks. If you watch both the seasons, you'll definitely come out with a bunch of favorite episodes, and this is because the writing and the direction aren't necessarily equally good throughout. Just because the show normalizes complementary gore, bloodshed, and sexual undertones, or overtones depending on the episode, it isn't really enough to classify something as adult. In those cases, it does feel a little superficial. Irrespective of all that, Love, Death and Robots is definitely a big step in the right direction for the genre. Watching it leaves you with a sense of existential angst, questioning your morals, or even the idea of morality in general. Before we go into our explanation, a very small request. If you like our content, please support this channel by subscribing to it. It's a very small click for you, but for us it means a great deal. Okay, let's go. This is precisely why it really boggles my mind that so many people on the internet don't know about Aeon Flux. Every single one of their episodes slaps hard. Aeon Flux is an absolute storytelling and directorial masterpiece. The funny bit is that it is also really old, having first aired on MTV way back in 1991. Still, there's definitely a lot of confusion as to why people online don't know about it, especially since there was a live-action movie adaptation and a video game made based on it too. Not that either were very popular or very well received, just like many other live-action adaptations of animated series. Aeon Flux was a show that really made you think about the importance of perspective and then convinces you that none of it really matters in the end. I believe that it's possible Aeon Flux may have inspired Love, Death and Robots to quite some great degree. So Aeon Flux was directed by Peter Chung, who had previously worked on Rugrats. Now this actually is quite significant because it heavily influenced his character design for the show. In the show Rugrats, the characters were all small, stubby toddlers, so there were limitations on how you could use their movements to help add to the atmosphere. This is probably why in Aeon Flux, the characters all have long, slender, sleek bodies and are all pretty acrobatic. There was even an episode where a woman took out a vertebra to do some contortionist gymnastics to escape the authoritarian state that she was stuck in. Yep, I did just say that. The angular and the geometric visuals are not something often seen in Western animation at all, so this was quite a refreshing look. Scenes were sometimes even split up into different frames on the same frame, much like you would see someone going through in a comic book. Considering the style of animation and the visuals, we could infer that Peter Chung was probably inspired by graphic novels too. Another interesting fact is that Chung did not want his initial idea to be made into a TV series. This is precisely why the so-called protagonist Eon was killed in every episode of the shorts. However, MTV kept pushing for the cartoon to be made into a series anyway, so that's why we got a 10-episode season afterwards. Out of these 10 episodes, the first 5 were directed by Peter Chung and the second 5 by Howard E. Baker. Also note that Howard E. Baker directed Rugrats as well, so it's not surprising that they worked together on the new show, but it is really great to see the difference in styles and concepts that they were both clearly aching to express after having worked on a sitcom animation.
How dare you, danger boy?
What was the show all about? Back in the day, MTV had a segment called Liquid Television. This was an experimental animated variety show that they used to introduce new ideas and adult animation to their audience. This is where Beavis and Butthead made their debut, and if you know about that show, then you know how and why it is more of a adult animation than anything else, mostly because of the type of humor used in the scripts. That wasn't the only animation to make it to the screen, however. There were quite a few shows that aired on this platform that really paid off in inspiring creators for many years to come, and that possibly inspired the creators of Love, Death and Robots. Not just that, it also made MTV a lot of money, because this was a very small risk that they took, and it really paid off. People all over America loved the shows from MTV's Liquid Television. Now, coming to Aeon Flux, initially the protagonist wasn't even supposed to have any name, really. It is first aired as a series of shorts about a few minutes long. The key point in these shorts was that they had no dialogue. All of the storytelling was done visually and honestly, and they did a really good job at that, all the while making you think about why things are the way that they are. And since there was no dialogue, fans just assumed that the protagonist was called Aeon, so it just kind of stuck. Now, although when you hear Aeon Flux, the first thing that pops into your head is probably the live-action movie that came out in 2005, but the cartoon shorts and the 10-episode season was quite popular back in 1991. The show was set in this futuristic world and everything was very sci-fi. Most of the Earth is barren due to the climate crisis, and the rest of mankind was split into two major cities, Monica and Bregna. There were some clear influences from Star Trek in terms of weapon design, but there was so much more to it. The characters often wore very BDSM style of clothing, including Aeon, who was basically a dominatrix James Bond assassin kind of person. This is not the only time we see sexual elements either. In fact, the show is absolutely filled with sexual overtones, fetishes, so much more. This is even reflected in the animation style as it builds on the perversions. Every episode is set in the same country of Bregna, and it seems at first that Aeon has noble intentions, even though she does often use her immoral ways to achieve her goals. This is probably one of the reasons why the show got so popular, due to the morally complex female protagonist. This is very similar to her antagonist, Trevor Goodchild, the ruler of the authoritarian state of Bregna. We keep learning that Trevor does have good intentions for his country and his people, although there is certainly a selfish and a devious side to him, as well as in terms of how he achieves his goals. Yes, on paper, he was providing his people with everything that they could possibly want, except that he does so while taking away their right of choice. The thing is that he wasn't very keen on giving them their free will, because he was convinced that he knew better than them and what they needed. So when we see super spy Aeon trying to thwart his plans and give something back to the people, it does seem to make her look like the good guy trying to fight the dictator. However, they do have a complex relationship despite being enemies. Throughout the series, we see that Trevor and Aeon are very attracted to each other and tease each other through various means, mainly by exhibiting their physical relationships with other people to each other, while at the same time never getting physically intimate themselves. So this adds an interesting twist, because it makes it even more difficult to decide whom to root for. They are both protagonists and both antagonists in name, but it's really just left to us to decide which perspective is right. And does this end justify the means, irrespective of what the cost may be? Each episode is a distinct story that is only related to the others by its main plot and its tone. In spite of this, concerns about autonomy and free will continue to surface. Aeon is recruited to abduct a stunning psychic humanoid bird-like hybrid in in Isthmus Crypticus by a guy who is certain he is in love with the creature. He is rejected by Aeon, who declares, "I'd sooner murder her than deliver her over to you," in response to his claim that the creature does not love him. She tries valiantly to show that a woman's lover is unworthy and does not actually love her in Thanatophobia, and then begs her not to try to cross the border between the cities, knowing that she will perish. Aeon is really saddened by the woman's decision to go, despite the warning, and her death. In The Purge, Aeon battles a sinister villain who is unexpectedly given a man-made soul before battling against receiving one herself. The show's defining theme is the struggle to maintain freedom at all costs. Exploring the first few episodes and the overall story arc. In the first episode, Aeon infiltrated Bregna just as Trevor Goodchild had agreed to accept the kidnapped elected President Clavius's position of power temporarily. He does try and keep up appearances by saying that there is an ongoing investigation about Clavius's kidnapping. As soon as possible, Trevor implements a policy of total openness, setting up cameras all around Bregna and allowing him complete authority over the populace. However, Trevor was the brains behind the kidnapping, as Gildemir, a Breen soldier who is loyal to Clavius, is correctly suspected. Gildemir is now conspiring against the new chairman. Trevor's motivations for the coup are twofold. First, he gains absolute power in Bregna. Second, he uses Clavius's body to build a secret location where he can permanently imprison Aeon and keep her to himself in complete secrecy. His obsession with Aeon is very apparent, just that Aeon does not seem to reciprocate. For her own reasons, Aeon joins forces with Gildemir and manages to get into Clavius, confronting Trevor and pointing him out. This enables Gildemir to free Clavius from Trevor's captivity. However, Clavius is later revealed to be completely insane, and Gildemir is compelled to kill him. Then they start to fight, and she quickly defeats him. Trevor discovers them both close to the fortified border, and Gildemir accuses Trevor of betraying the kingdom. However, Aeon unlocks her own underwear with the key to Clavius, prompting the other soldiers to reveal their own duplicate keys. This appears to refute Gildemir's assertions and paves the way for Trevor to solidify his position of authority. However, Trevor's wish to keep Aeon to himself is not fulfilled because Aeon planned her escape route well in advance. So despite giving Trevor the key back, she flees across the border to Monica. In the second episode, Trevor is attempting to woo the female of two Seraph Trevs, humanoid bird captives. Ilbren, a different scientist, is aiming to get the female for himself, even going so far as to try to use Aeon to capture it and offer the male in exchange. Ilbren uses a swarm of robotic wasps to repel a mechanical tentacle that interrupts their conversation. The male Seraph Trev is imprisoned in a secure chamber, reduced by his separation from his mate to a state of utter despair. Una, an old friend of Aeon's, is hired by her to translate the location of the Seraph Trev's quarters as part of her plan to release the group from Ilbren and Trevor's schemes. Like Aeon, Una is an outcast in society, and she appears to be in love with Seraph Trev, a man, after receiving a picture of him as a messenger pigeon. It's implied the male sent out the bird with the picture as a call for help. Una is distracted by the picture and is unable to translate the instructions in the allotted time, but Aeon and Una nonetheless sneak into the base. Una leads Aeon through a maze of tunnels, but when she knows where Aeon is going, she sets out on her own to find the male. Ilbren locates Trevor, ambushes him, ties him up, and proceeds to the female. Una and Aeon are fighting over the guy when Trevor escapes and discovers Ilbren with the woman. The female Seraph Trev rushes to embrace her partner as Aeon blows a breach in the wall separating them, but one of Ilbren's mechanical wasps escapes and strikes her, killing her. Despite his sadness, the guy takes Una, and the two fly off into an exhilarating embrace. After killing Ilbren, Trevor orders Aeon to go to hell while grieving the loss of the female Seraph Trev. "Will you fly me there?" asks Aeon. Una and the male Seraph Trev fly through the clouds at the conclusion of the episode, with a male mite crawling onto Una and biting her as a foreshadowing of her fate to be the same as the female. The opening scene of the show's third episode features two youngsters playing combat while another boy claps to simulate hard strikes. Later, the child throws a stone onto the path of one of the border turrets to activate it. He then stands back to observe the show. Although Trevor Goodchild wants to use the power of ideas to persuade people to stay in Bregna, the government is pressuring him to make the border scarier. One of the officials literally wanted a giant pair of scissors to cut people in half if they tried to cross. In order to accomplish this, he covertly permits Aeon to enter and blast the plant that produces the wall's component sections. Two Breen lovers, Onan and Sybil, attempt to cross the border from Bregna into Monica in a parallel but connected plot. The escape is almost successful until Sybil is shot in the back by one of the turrets, breaking one of her vertebrae. She can now only stand up straight when a specific ampole is placed, but when she removes it, she gains flexibility that would otherwise be impossible, increasing the likelihood that she will cross successfully. Trevor becomes interested in Sybil after she is made to work in the Aeon-bombed factory to pay for her medical expenses. He visits her under the cover of a doctor and manipulates her nerves through the gap in her spine to cause an orgasm. While visiting her to find another means to obtain his lover's attention out of jealousy, Aeon indulges Onan in his sexual proclivities. Eventually, Sybil learns the truth and vehemently rejects Aeon's offer of assistance, informing Goodchild of Aeon's covert entry into Bregna and learning of his opposition to the new border defenses. Sybil tries to cross the border once more while holding a returned Onan captive in her apartment. She manages to dodge the turrets this time, but before she can enter Monica, wires ensnare her legs and robots made with components she helped produce anesthetize and amputate them, leaving her permanently stranded in Bregna. The clapping boy is now missing his arms, indicating that he had tried his stone trick again and been captured by the robots. The episode concludes with the guys from the beginning fighting each other in real life while the clapping boy sits nearby. When the fourth episode begins, Goodchild has developed a technique for replicating humans. Aeon and Scaphandra, a Bregna double agent who had had a hand transplant to replace lost foot parts after losing them during a border crossing, enter Bregna with the intention of stopping the surgery. Scaphandra is taken prisoner and brought to Goodchild, who extracts a sample of her for duplicating as Aeon races for Trevor's base of operations. Aeon enters, releases Scaphandra, and confronts Trevor about the morality and the hidden goals of his actions. Trevor is given the chance to sample her intentionally by Aeon, who destroys Scaphandra's sample in the process. When Aeon departs, Trevor creates a clone of Aeon for himself. Aeon's elaborate plan to hurt Goodchild as much as possible by having her copy take her place plays with Trevor's emotions and ultimately lets her copy kill her when revealed. The real Aeon starts to lose herself as she completes her portion of the job, falling for Trevor and vice versa. But while still being herself, she gives her a copy of the command to murder Scaphandra. The copy complies with her twin's request, acting as though she is traveling across the border with Scaphandra while remaining still and letting the turrets kill her deceitful partner. The real Aeon then confronts the copy, who now has a very different appearance and wardrobe than she did before. As the two Aeons unwillingly prepare to cross the border, Trevor instructs the turrets to be turned off because he doesn't want the Aeon he has grown to love perish. The genuine Aeon stops and lets the turrets blast her just before they're turned off as Trevor watches in terror. The two Aeons complete part of their escape. As the copy flees back into Monica, the episode ends with Trevor sobbing over Aeon's body. A conflict between Monican agents and Breen soldiers serves as the opening to the novel. Aeon and the Monicans are getting ready to launch the Demiurge, an astral creature that threatens to dangerously distort people's perceptions of the universe. Trevor is determined to stop them because he thinks that the Demiurge will guarantee that humanity has a lasting peace. After a protracted and expensive battle, the rocket is successfully launched, but not before the Demiurge injects, divides itself into 3 earthly avatars: a cat, a bird, and a revived Monarchan agent named Nader. The 3 avatars experience various outcomes throughout the course of this episode. The bird is captured by Aeon in a Monarchan morgue and appears to vanish. The cat is almost killed by Nader's lover, Celia, while she's carrying out his final request to her, but she manages to save it, only to fade when left alone, and Nader is taken to a Breen base for experimentation, where he starts to exhibit pregnancy symptoms. Aeon visits Nader in her abode, a wobbly building held together by just a single cable. Aeon kills Celia without the killer even realizing whom she has killed, because she broke into the house apparently trying to take the bird avatar. Aeon tries to kill Nader's baby, but it's too late for her to stop Trevor from removing the Demiurge's new humanoid form. Aeon and Trevor argue about the Demiurge as it quickly reaches maturity and assumes a physical form resembling its host. All the while, the power of the Demiurge expresses itself in the neighboring population as extreme positive and extreme negative emotions. When Celia is being taken to safety by the Demiurge and seeking refuge in Aeon's house, the supporting cable suddenly snaps and the building collapses. Although it appears to be buried in the debris, Trevor is certain that the Demiurge is still alive. Despite his objections, Aeon assures him that they are acting in its best interests. Aeon eventually saves herself and Trevor by clinging to a piece of the building's debris. The episode ends with Nader and Celia reuniting after the Demiurge's power has returned him to a normal state of living and carried him to safety. What made the show particularly groundbreaking? The reason Aeon Flux had the impact that it did was obvious. There was nothing else like it out there. The introductory music was apparently supposed to sound like the soundtrack from the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but broken. I believe they did a really good job at this because it does set the atmosphere without us realizing it immediately. What I mean by this is that the soundtrack gives the show a bit of a heroic feel, while at the same time making it sound a bit haunting. Peter Chung makes a lot of sense because the show follows the format of hero versus villain. The beauty is in the fact that just because that is the structure doesn't mean that is what is going on exactly. As previously mentioned, Aeon is the apparent heroine of the show. However, considering the methods that she uses to get what she wants, we are often left thinking if it was actually justified or not. For example, in one of the shorts, we see Aeon fighting and shooting her way through an army of soldiers. This goes on to such a degree that there is a scene where there are giant piles of corpses and the room is filled with blood. Here we see that one of the soldiers finds their loved one only to discover that they've been affected by a virus that had been infecting their ranks for some time. In their last moments, the first soldier takes off the mask to reveal that she hasn't even been affected by the disease. This sends the other soldier into shock and he dies in her arms, leaving her all alone and crying. This goes to show the futility of war and how there's always a side that suffers no matter what. The cost of war is often too great, and the episode makes us question if the bigger purpose of winning such a war is justified if it is meant to have such terror and brutality for so many. Later in the episode, Aeon finds the cure for the disease, but simply disposes of it to use the container as a makeshift hand grenade. Again, this makes us question not just Aeon's motive, but also the line between good and evil. The art style is also extremely unique. Western animation has not really seen these angular graphics before, so this can primarily be attributed to Peter Chung's creativity and his originality. We can tell that there were even some influences from the manga. The show is riddled with gore, graphic violence, sexual overtones, and fetishes. However, that never remains the focus of the series. Sure, it adds to how morality can be persuaded given the different desires of a man, but it never takes away from the core principle of making the audience think for themselves. There is no leading narrative that is followed perfectly to the T. At the end of every episode, we're left thinking about who was right and who was wrong, why there were these casualties that could possibly have been avoided, and to what extent are you going to pursue your goals if it means dehumanizing yourself in the eyes of others and possibly even yourself. Aeon has captivating, chaotic qualities, but she is also a strong anti-fascist moral compass that makes it possible for the viewer to support her even while she is acting quite viciously. Even when she is unavoidably opposed to other women, Aeon almost always presents herself as one of their allies. Throughout the series, she has brief relationships with a number of individuals, and there are clear hints of queer partnerships as well. The lady she works with in the second episode, her boyfriend accuses her of leaving him for, causes Aeon to kick him out of their apartment because he is upset about the time that they spend together. The woman does not deny this while she does this, even though she has a tragic story. It's clear that she and Aeon are dating by the end of the episode because she's seen wearing Aeon's leather jacket as a sort of safety blanket. All of the stories of Aeon Flux do, in fact, come to tragic ends, but if you look closely, you can find a kind of twisted hope. Trevor may never hear from Aeon, but she will never allow him to triumph. This is a cutting-edge interpretation of science fiction, but it is presented in the optimistic spirit of creative exploration, or providing us with thought-provoking story arcs and one of the greatest genre protagonists of the 1990s. This series manages to be surprisingly insightful, despite the unconnected structure of the current story. The Hollywood attempt to recreate this classic was underwhelming. The live-action movie adaptation was one of the worst things that could have happened to the Aeon Flux franchise. The movie was very poorly received, and the only thing it did well was tarnish the legacy of Peter Chung and what he created back in the 90s. There are rumors of a new Aeon Flux live-action series. However, it will be quite difficult to completely negate the effects this 2005 movie had. The movie was loosely based on the animated series that ran for 3 seasons between 1991 and 1995. The first 2 seasons had no dialogue. The plot of the movie is about Aeon, the dominatrix super spy, trying to bring down the fascist ruler Trevor Goodchild with help from the Monarchan freedom fighters. The idea was to bring down the government because even though on the surface Bregna seemed like an ideal paradise, the people were plagued with many evils. People, for example, would go missing without explanation. Considering how interesting the premise may sound, the movie clearly didn't do the plot justice in expression, at least because it earned a mere $52 million at the box office compared to its $62 million budget. Not only was the film a financial loss for the producers, it was also heavily criticized by reviewers like Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. Although Aeon Flux had some remarkably talented people working on it, both in front of and behind the camera, the studio had quite a negative impact on the entire production. For example, Brasilia in South America was initially the location Karen Kasuma had in mind for the filming of Bregna, since it has distinctive 20th century architecture. This architectural style would be quite fitting considering the source material that is the animated series. The producers, however, stepped in because they felt Brasilia lacked the necessary infrastructure to undertake a production of this size. Therefore, a bunch of important scenes were shot in Berlin. This ended up taking away heavily from the original idea that Kusama had in mind and negatively affected the expression that she probably had in mind too. Even when the shooting was completely finished, there was still conflict within the studio. In an interview with BuzzFeed, executives expressed their dissatisfaction with the finished result, saying it was too intellectual and likely to turn off viewers. And yeah, that sounds very discriminatory in my opinion, because the intellectual and the moral dilemma is the entire point of Aeon Flux. Co-scriptwriter Phil Hay had said that producers called the original product a $50 million art movie. As someone who has watched the animated show, this sounded perfect to me. However, it seems that the higher-ups in the production department had not intended for that to happen. As a result, the studio mandated significant post-production adjustments, including altering character arcs and plot lines, as well as extensively re-editing the finished movie. There's no way to tell whether Kusama's original concept would have been more carefully carried out, but there is no denying that the modified version that was released on screens was a significant step backwards. It wasn't just the studio that was the problem either. We found out that even Peter Chung was very disappointed by the script and even felt humiliated. And honestly, who can blame him? He created something so thought-provoking and so meaningful, and the movie just blatantly disrespected that. It can't really be said that if there wasn't any post-production interference, that the movie would have been great either. According to Chung, he had a major issue with the portrayal of both Aeon and Trevor back when he had just read the script. Another reason why the movie went wrong could also be related to the fact that the movie was set roughly 5,000 years before the events of the animated series. Despite all these issues that arose behind the scenes, the final Aeon Flux movie has parts that are undoubtedly plagiarized. The fact that the film attempted and failed to capitalize on the Matrix's success serves as a symptom of one of the main issues with sci-fi in the early 2000s. Aeon Flux tried to capitalize on the demand for dystopian, high-concept sci-fi movies with lots of martial arts like many other movies at the time. Nevertheless, despite starting with an intriguing premise, the finished product ultimately fell way short of bringing anything fresh to the genre. Another fact that probably wasn't helpful at all to the movie's success was that the plot of having authoritarian police fighting against a secret freedom fighting force was quite prevalent during the time of the movie's release. Equilibrium had just come out a few years prior, and we know that it did significantly better. So to make something that has similar settings, you would have to add something to make it stand out, which the 2005 Aeon Flux just didn't have. Looking back at some memorable characters. The only two recurring characters in Aeon Flux are Aeon and Trevor. Aeon is a very strong and independent woman, and she really hates fascists like Trevor. She's lethal and highly trained as an assassin and a spy. She has flings with pretty much anyone she wants to, whenever she wants to, or if it makes her mission easier. At the same time, she's also quick to dispose of those who aren't useful to her. Aeon does have a soft spot for other women, even if they are her enemies. However, at the end of the day, her mission is the end-all, be-all of her life. Trevor is a man who pretty much plays God in his country. He sets the rules and everyone follows them. His belief that he has everyone's best interests at heart is what allows him to commit these acts that he does. It's all justified to him. In that way, he is similar to Aeon. Despite being mortal and moral enemies, there is a significant sexual attraction between them, which makes it that much harder for us to root for either side. Trevor's idea of giving people what they want is by taking away their free will so that there can no longer be any evil. Aeon is of the belief that taking away free will from society is the biggest evil that one can do. At the end of it all, we realize that not everything can be black and white. The world runs on different shades of grey.
Goodbye.
The marvelous verdict. It made way for the likes of Love, Death, and Robots. Peter Chung and the show he created with the shorts and the half-hour animated episodes was nothing short of revolutionary in terms of visual storytelling and defining what adult animation means. It paved the way for creators and animators to take their platform and push literature to the next level. Without visionaries like Peter Chung, we probably wouldn't have adult animation in the same sense that we do have it today, invoking thoughts about morality and blurring the line between good and evil. are just parts of what it means to grow up into adulthood. Understanding that not everything is as it seems, and not everyone can be saved. This show definitely made the way for Love, Death and Robots and the like, and I firmly believe that it will continue to inspire writers and creators for many more years to come. If you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and please subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, have a good one, and please be safe.